Greetings one and all to another Dark Rider pony analysis. I am the Nightmare Rider, Major Mind, reminding you as always that even a cheeseburger can be deconstructed to its original source. Bats seem to be another episode that is quite polarising in the brony analysis community so far. We all tend to agree that it's at least entertaining, however the execution on this unusual twist of what we'd expect to be a more slice of life type premise seems to be the biggest point of debate between brony analysts so far. The first thing they want to note about this episode is it's probably one of the more character-focused episodes of all of Season 4 so far. Considering that this episode was written by Meriwether Williams, my first initial concern would be the potential for character flanderization that would seriously undermine most of the actions that the characters would take. Since the base premise for this episode is Applejack's apple being under siege from vampire fruit bats on the first day of apple bucking season, dialogue feels more condensed and focused largely on the debate between Fluttershy and Applejack on how to handle the problem. The first positive that springs to mind is the expansion of the bestiary in Equestria. We have already seen fruit bats in the past, while these vampire fruit bats are a significantly more vicious breed that is already decimating a large chunk of Sweet Apple Acres. So it's a nice simple piece of world building that plays into Fluttershy's favour. While I would normally criticise a large amount of exposition that goes on through most of the first act, including the episode's song, I actually think it works in this episode. Considering that Sweet Apple Acres is Applejack's livelihood, as well as Granny Smith's horror story encountering the fruit bats, it makes sense how adamant she is to get rid of the ravenous creatures as soon as possible. Not to mention how she has Chekhov's gun, I mean a gigantic apple, which she plans to enter into an Appaloosa competition. I was quite worried from the premise that Applejack would be portrayed as unreasonably humane, but thankfully she just wants to get them out as soon as possible rather than on a sort of extermination plan. Fluttershy, on the other hoof, is thinking a lot more in the perspective of the animals, since she is the animal expert. She isn't being a complete pushover like she was in Magic Duel, but she isn't commanding to a ridiculous degree like she was in Putting Your Hoof Down, which is a criticism I put against the episode, despite it being one of my favourites. I've mentioned before how I feel she has taken these lessons from Putting Your Hoof Down and Hurricane Fluttershy to heart, asserting her position on the vampire fruit bats being reasonable creatures for the benefit of the orchard, unlike the destructive monsters that Applejack portrays them as. And there's another reason I praise the focus on the debate this earlier in the episode. We actually get to see evidence for both sides of the argument, which asks the audience to make a judgment call. It doesn't force feed us the correct answer right away, which it could easily have done. While the majority of the main six do side with Applejack, which I will talk about in a minute, I do like how they got to see evidence of both the mass destruction of the bats have created, as well as the fact that they spit out seeds which lead to stronger trees when they regrow. Fluttershy understands not just how to care for animals, but also how they fit into the ecosystem of Equestria. As I mentioned in my Power Ponies review, show don't tell is a very important rule when it comes to visual storytelling media. Now, before I go on to talk about my dislike for the song, I do want to mention that I don't dislike it for having greater evidence on Applejack's side, or for the pure fact that the main six were more convinced by Applejack's rather than Fluttershy. Considering the drama from the devastation, I can understand how Fluttershy talking more about the long-term positive effects would be less convincing. While it is not a bad song in terms of the merits of its music, the reason why I don't like it is actually two reasons. Firstly, it feels too aggressive in how suddenly turned on Fluttershy, looking down on her with harsh expression as she cowers beneath them. I was bothered by how Pinkie Pie was going along with it so quickly, as well as how soon Twilight turned on Fluttershy, which made it feel unnecessarily mean-spirited. Twilight's character development and the fact she's supposed to be the voice of reason that holds the group together makes it very unlike her to so aggressively turn on Applejack's side. Secondly, the song didn't actually need to be there at all. Why? Because they repeat everything they just said in the song right after. Twilight explains in a much calmer manner why Applejack's short-term solution was more preferable to Fluttershy's idea of a sanctuary, not to mention how they were actually given reasons to why they all side on Applejack. They didn't need the song when all the information could be explained better without it. When it comes to the topic of Flanderization, I think the biggest problem is that all of the episodes so far have been using all the main six together when they didn't need to be there. Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie have been just boiled down to almost a single character trait so that it can be used in this episode, with Dash obsessed with cider and Pinkie Pie just blindly going along with it for the ride. This is why I actually think Season 3 did it right for character balance in the episodes. Since the main six didn't need to be there together 100% of the time, since nobody was so horned into the plot for the sake of being there. Spike has it worse here, since he barely has any lines at all and could have been just kept to the end to write the journal if being in this episode at all. He's literally just there and does nothing. It should be noted that this episode is quite reference heavy, giving many pop culture references to Batman in previous episodes, establishing continuity. It's great that they are keeping continuity to make the world feel more cohesive, but I can't help but think they overdid it with this episode. A big merit of MLP is just how much it makes the stories interesting through its own world, rather than relying on pointing to outside sources for the sake of its humour. It's okay when it does it in small doses, especially with the Pinkie Pie's Fruit Bat Roundup song being a very nice touch, but there comes a point when the effort should be focused more on the story and less on the visual reference gags. As for Flutterbat herself, I really like how she was portrayed once she was properly revealed. I feel like it added a great deal of dramatic fun with her slowly becoming more bat-like and less pony-like. I also like that Fluttershy actually reflected the vampire fruit bats well. Not malicious, just scary looking and focused on feeding without thoughts for others. While I initially felt the same way Digibrony did about Flutterbat, being that it was very out of left field and didn't quite fit with the rest of the episode, when I get to one of the morals for the episode, I will explain how I felt it supported the conclusion very well. The fact that Flutterbat was here at all was not the problem in my mind. The problem is that the build-up wasn't subtle in the least. I mention this now rather than before my conclusion about Flutterbat's overall effectiveness, because I want to emphasise that it's only the build-up that doesn't work, rather than the conclusion it leads to. The build-up fails because it's made completely obvious that spell has gone wrong, slowly making Fluttershy crave apples. You can't have a dramatic build-up with the main five being stalked by a mysterious new creature when it's made completely obvious to them what it is right away. If you want to build up to a big reveal, keep it a secret or throw in some red herrings and don't show it in your face right away. There is no mystery to be had after you reveal it. Now actually, what this episode really needed was a few red herrings. Instead of blatantly showing us right away that it's Fluttershy being transformed into a bat pony, we should have instead have Fluttershy look as if she's hiding something without the main six knowing. Instead of her saying outright that she doesn't know of any other animal that would suck the fruit dryer like this, instead she could have mentioned a number of different animals that could have been done in a nervous manner, throwing a vague few shadows as what could be interpreted as another creature before the full reveal of Flutterbat, and there we would at least have some resemblance of tension in the build-up over the mystery. This is the point where Applejack's giant apple fulfills the Chekhov's gun trope. If an object is given focus and is considered important, it's definitely going to be useful later. While I do like how Applejack is willing to give up her prized apple for the sake of her friend, what really gives me mixed feelings is the fact that they trapped Fluttershy within her own stare using a circle of mirrors. On a basic level, this is a clever idea that I didn't expect, since it's a quick and harmless way to keep Fluttershy still so Twilight can undo the spell she used. But unfortunately, this also puts into question exactly how the Fluttershy spare is supposed to work. If it's something she does willingly, as there is evidence to do so in this very episode, why did simply looking into a mirror set it up? She wasn't doing the stare the whole time, to the best of what we can see. It doesn't seem to be a magical ability of any sort, more so just a hypnotic glance that commands full attention to those who notice it. Thankfully, the moral really saves the episode overall. The concept of both not rushing to short-term solutions without the thought of long-term consequences follows on from the entire scenario, since Twilight's spell as a quick fix to please Applejack without the consideration of what the long-term effects would be caused this whole mess. It's a pretty dramatic lesson when your friend becomes a hybrid species because of your haste. But even more important, we are taught the common lesson about peer pressure, which I honestly didn't expect from this episode. This has equal weight to it considering how much the main five pressured Fluttershy into unleashing her stare in the first place. Well, I guess now is a good time to sum up the episode. There are a lot of flaws in this episode's build-up, mostly when it comes to character representation, but the moral of this episode that builds upon some great character transactions already gives it a great deal more substance than Power Ponies did. Seeing Flutterbat unleashed across Sweet Apple Acres was really entertaining, particularly when it plays to the biggest strength of Venzapi's magic as a whole. Presenting reasonable and applicable morals to children in a fun and and freshly inventive way without talking down to its audience. While it still isn't a great episode, I still feel the merits are big enough and they're focused in just the right places so that the flaws didn't completely smother the great deal of the entertainment value like Power Ponies did. I'd give Bats a final grade of a C+.